This is my first time posting on Reddit, and I'm not the best writer, but this subreddit reminded me of something that happened to me a while ago. Please excuse me if this story jumps around a bit, because it's honestly confusing for me still, and I'm the one that it happened to. About 2 years ago, when I was 17, I received a Facebook message from someone named Dan who I didn't recognize. I had mutual friends with him, and he looked to be around the same age as me, so I wasn't too alarmed. What follows is some of the messages. Hello. How have you been? I haven't seen you in a few years. Hi, I'm not trying to be rude, but do we know each other? Yeah, you really don't know me? I didn't respond to that one. Wow, real nice way to treat a family friend. Sorry, I just don't recognize you. Dan then sent a picture of me and him together from when we were little. And I mean really little. Like I looked maybe 2 or 3, and he looked about 5 or 6. Oh wow, did our parents used to be friends or something? I was your neighbor. You really don't recognize me? Come on, I didn't move that long ago. He had, in fact, moved a very long time ago. At least 12 years or so. So I honestly feel like it's not that uncommon for me to not recognize someone who I hadn't seen or talked to since I was 4. Anyways, the conversation continued a while like that. I apologized for not remembering him and just started catching up. He was being nice enough, and I was bored, so whatever. No harm, no foul. After we kept talking, I started remembering more about him. I remembered him coming over and swinging in my backyard, and me going over to his house with my big brother, all of us hanging out together. Dan was a few years older than me, at least 2, but I can't remember exactly. Anyways, we kept talking on Facebook, just messaging each other back and forth about normal things, until it started to get a bit late. I was tired and had school the next day, so I told him I was about to go to bed. I closed my computer and laid down and went to sleep. The next morning I woke up to a bunch of messages from him. Things like, "Good night, beautiful. Sweet dreams. Message me when you wake up. Can't wait to talk to you." Literally almost 50 messages. In a way, I was kind of flattered that I was getting so much attention, but more than anything, I was creeped out. I opened the messages and kind of glanced through them. I just didn't reply. On my phone, I have it set to where I don't get notifications from Facebook Messenger. At the time, I was in a lot of group chats with different team sports or groups of friends, so it was just easier at the end of the day to check my messages versus getting a ton of notifications all day long. Some point during the day, I got more messages from him that I just hadn't noticed while I was at school. He was saying things like, "Do you still live at insert address here?" Where I still did live. "Does your mom still freak out about you hanging out with boys? Well, let's go and catch up. Let me take you out and treat you right." It just kept going on and on. Really random questions that weren't really necessarily threatening, but just somewhat creepy. And then him talking about wanting to go on dates. He didn't even live in the same state anymore that I live in, so I have no idea how he would have planned on going on dates with me. The messages just kept continuing over the next week, him telling me that he wants to go on dates and asking me a bunch of weird questions about my mom, my brother, and my house. Then he started asking about his house that he used to live in. I didn't reply to any of his messages, but I was getting at least 50 a day. I'm not sure why I didn't block him. I think I was kind of entertained in a way, like I sort of thought it was funny. Eventually, I brought it up to my mom, and just asked her if she remembered Dan from next door. Her face completely drained of color, and she got super serious all of a sudden. She asked me why I was bringing him up out of nowhere. I told her that he had messaged me on Facebook, and was trying to get me to go on a date with him, and was just trying to catch up. I didn't tell her he had been messaging me 50 times plus a day, and that I wasn't responding at this point. She immediately told me to block him and never message him again. I asked her why, and this is a summary of what she told me. When I was 3 or 4, I used to play over at his house a lot. His mom would always offer to babysit me if my mom had to go out and run errands or something, and he also had a little sister who was around my age. My mom figured it was a perfect opportunity for a play date between Dan, my brother, me, and Dan's little sister. One day when I came home after one of these play dates, my mom is asking me and my brother what we'd done that day. My brother started talking about how we watched some movie. I don't know which one. Apparently, I told my mom that Dan had brushed my hair for me. My mom thought that was a little weird. What 6-year-old boy is gonna want to brush a 3-year-old girl's hair? She asked a couple of more questions. She doesn't really remember the details, and I don't really remember them either, saying as I was a toddler. But somehow it ended up coming out that he wasn't just brushing my hair. He had taken a brush and was rubbing it all over my body while I was only in my undies. I'm not gonna get more explicit than that. And no, nothing more serious ever happened, thank God. It was more just weird than anything. My brother didn't know anything about this because we had been in Dan's room, and my brother had been in the living room with Dan's little sister. After that, my mom didn't let me go back over to his house again. Apparently, when my mom confronted his mom about it, a huge fight broke out. Not physically, but a screaming match. It turns out Dan had been doing similar stuff to his little sister, but it had escalated far farther than it had with me. My mom threatened to report them to the police or Child Protective Services, which she did both. But before much could be done, they had moved out and found somewhere else to live. After hearing that from my mom, I immediately blocked Dan on Facebook. I wasn't quick enough, I guess, however, because he messaged a bunch of my friends on Facebook, asking about me, and had changed his relationship status to taken and in a relationship with me. He then followed me on Instagram and found my Snapchat somehow. He liked and commented almost all of my Instagram pictures and sent me a bunch of Snapchats. I have a feeling you can guess the kinds of pictures he sent. I quickly blocked him on both, and luckily he never figured out my phone number. I've decided to share a story from my childhood that I believe is let's not meet material. This happened in the late 90s in a medium-sized town in New England. It was just about the end of summer. I had just turned 9 years old. I had gotten a Nintendo 64 for my birthday and was logging some serious hours of GoldenEye and Mario 64 on this beautiful summer day turned evening. My friend had gotten 120 stars and met Yoshi already, and here I hadn't even breached 70 when my mom came down the stairs. It was time to go pick up my younger brother from camp, and since my dad wasn't home from work yet, I had to go with her. I was mid-star here. I pleaded with her to let me stay at home just this once. No, you can't pause it. I won't answer the door. If someone calls, you're in the shower and you'll call them right back. I'm not a little baby. My mom had let me stay home alone during the day a couple of times. I knew all the rules, but it was starting to get dark out, and she didn't want to let me stay home alone at night. I still pleaded with her. Finally, knowing that my dad would be home in about the next 30 minutes or so, she relented. Score. She must have run into my dad in the driveway, because it couldn't have been more than a minute before I heard the garage door open, and my dad walked in. It was time to go pick up my older brother from football practice. I paused my game. There was a 0% chance I could convince my dad to let me stay home, even for the 20 or 30 minutes it would take to scoop up my brother. We drove to the field and watched the last 15 minutes of the practice under the lights. It would have been nearing 9 p.m. by the time we reached the driveway again. Light poured from the garage door as it went up. "Whoa, did you guys see that?" my brother exclaimed. "Some guy just ran through our backyard." Our house was set back from the road and surrounded on all sides by woods, so there definitely shouldn't be anyone in our backyard. I thought my brother was just trying to scare me, and presumably so did my dad, because he told him to pipe down. It was just a shadow. We lived in a typical colonial house. The garage opened into a finished basement that was our game room. My dad and my brother went upstairs, as I quickly shuffled back to my game. I flipped on the lights and immediately noticed that the window pane on the door to the backyard had a big hole smashed through it. I called for my dad to come back downstairs. He went and checked the door. It was still closed and locked. He checked the rest of the basement, and another window that opened underneath our deck had a hole in it, and a brick was laying on the floor. My brother and I were in shock, as my dad grabbed a bat and checked the first and second floors. No other doors or windows were broken, and nothing was missing. My dad called the police, and they showed up a couple of minutes later. They checked around outside. Then they led us out to the back patio and showed us what had happened. Someone had punched a hole through the door pane so they could reach in and try to unlock the door. They hadn't anticipated that it was actually a key-only deadbolt, meaning you needed a key to open the door from the inside as well. These used to be commonplace, but are no longer allowed because of the risk of trapping you in a fire. Next, he had tried to kick the door in. There were clear footprints all over the door, but it still held strong. After that didn't work, he had taken the screen out of the window under the deck, thrown a brick through the glass, undone the latch, and opened the window an inch or two. We must have interrupted him when we pulled into the driveway. My brother had actually seen a man run into the woods in our backyard. 2 more minutes and he might have already been in. The really scary part is that all of our doors going in and out of the house were key-only deadbolts. If he would have gotten in and gone upstairs, if we've gotten home just 5 minutes later, he would have essentially been trapped in the house. He would have had to get past us to leave. We would have inevitably come face to face with the intruder as we went upstairs. Worst yet, he might have hidden somewhere in the house and tried to sneak out later, or do God knows what. Imagine checking your closet as a 9-year-old, only to actually find someone hiding in it. My mom and younger brother got home just as the police were finishing up. She told the cop that in the early afternoon, she had seen a man that looked out of place walking down the street. He was a youngish white guy with long, sandy blonde hair and a scruffy beard. The cops each gave each other a look. There had been a string of burglaries one town over. In the last one, a young girl had been home alone and caught him trying to break in. She came face to face with him through a window. She ran and hid in a closet while she called 911. The guy actually still broke into the house and left muddy footprints all over, but he didn't take anything. They thought maybe he was looking for the girl, because it looked like he had checked under all the beds. They believe he had fled in a truck stolen from a neighboring house that was burglarized the same day. The girl had described him as a young white male, with a beard and a long sandy blonde ponytail. Sure enough, the police came back the next morning. They had found the stolen truck, abandoned and out of gas a couple of streets over. It had some stolen electronics in the back, and apparently it also had a bunch of women's clothing that he must have taken from the other houses as well. They didn't say underwear, but I assume that's what they had meant. They took pictures and lifted fingerprints. The cops told us he had most likely been scoping out the neighborhood when my mom saw him the first time. He chose our house because there were woods all around it. He had probably waited in the woods and watched the cars leave before trying to break in. That was when it all started to dawn on me that if my dad hadn't gotten home right when he did, or if he had let me stay home while he picked up my brother, I would have been home alone when the man tried to break in. This guy who'd already broken into one house when he knew a little girl was home alone. Needless to say, I didn't want to stay home alone for a while after that. A couple of days later, I was playing outside with some of the neighborhood kids. We went to hang out in the fort we built in the woods that overlooked my backyard, and found some 20 cigarette butts inside. The guy must have hidden out in my fort and watched our house all afternoon and evening until he saw both cars leave. If I hadn't gotten that Nintendo 64 for my birthday a few days earlier, I would have most definitely been playing in the woods that day. I also wouldn't have wanted to stay home alone though, so my Nintendo both saved my life and nearly got me killed. When I was about 12, I decided making a newspaper for my entire neighborhood was a really great idea. My friend and I, both avid fiction wannabe authors and generally cringy middle school nerds, decided to get together once a month and write absolutely enthralling articles about the weather or when the pool would be open. We'd then deliver our front and back one-page newsletter to every single house in our two-street neighborhood, whether they wanted it or not. We kept this up for about 2 years until the time of this story. So we were on our once-a-month paper route, if you could call walking around our small neighborhood and putting a single sheet of paper in every mailbox a paper route. It was raining this particular time, so we had umbrellas and were carefully walking to each mailbox, trying to keep our newsletters as dry as possible. This also meant that all the cars that came by had their headlights and windshield wipers on, and also made sufficient noise with their tires splashing through puddles. My point is that we knew when a car was approaching from behind us. We were about halfway through, on a street we weren't so familiar with, the one we didn't live on, when we noticed this souped-up old white car coming really slowly up the street. Now, the way my neighborhood is set up, the only reason why you would be on the same street as us is if you lived there, or you made a wrong turn. There were even less cars on this street, and the ones that usually passed were people that we knew. We continued walking from mailbox to mailbox, while periodically checking to make sure the white car wasn't just parked. It was moving so slowly, and the headlights and windshield wipers were either broken or just not turned on. This car slowly drove past us as we walked, going roughly the same pace as our steps, if not a little slower. Something was so off about this. There was no reason for this car to be on this road in the first place. We definitely didn't recognize it or the driver inside, and it was going so incredibly slow. Car trouble? I don't know. We pretended one of the houses was ours, and walked up the driveway to avoid the car as it got closer to us. It continued at the same pace, and we watched it until it eventually disappeared around the corner. We laughed it off, thinking it was a bit weird, but in the end nothing happened. It was all well and good, until the car showed up at the end of the street behind us again, going just as slowly as it had the first time. What was this person doing? We were so confused and walked a little farther away from the curb to avoid the car again as it came by. We didn't laugh about it this time. The car showed up again a third time at the end of the street. At this point, we decided we should cut through some yards to get home. Better safe than sorry, right? We crossed the street, but the car passed by again. We shrugged it off and kept going. The fourth time this car came around, it pulled up right next to us, and the driver rolled his window down. Being 12 and living in a bubble, my friend and I hadn't quite been exposed to the world of drugs and junkies, but we knew something was wrong about this guy. He had a white towel draped over half his head, was wearing a white tank top, while we were in long sleeves and rain jackets. He had his window down, and when he spoke, his speech was incredibly slurred. We were polite and said hello, and he asked us what we were doing through his open window. We continued walking as this interaction took place, because we knew this dude seemed sketch, but at the same time we didn't want to assume anything and be rude. When we told him we ran a newspaper, he immediately perked up and enthusiastically began asking about placing an ad. He also took his hands off the steering wheel and leaned over so he could get closer to the window. He smelled deeply of cigarettes. My friend and I looked at each other. We knew something was wrong. We told him, no, we don't place ads in our newspaper, even though we did. Quite the entrepreneurs at age 12. He told us we were pretty girls and probably cold. Our idea to cut through some yards was immediately decided. We hurriedly said something about needing to go home, and he began shouting at us from inside the car as we crossed the street. We bolted to a neighbor's backyard when we heard the car begin to move quickly. We hid in some bushes for a while, until we were absolutely sure the car was gone. We stopped writing a newsletter after that. Meeting a creepy person while you're alone in the rain in your own neighborhood was a good deciding factor for calling it quits. Hello. Long-time reader, first-time poster. I don't know if I'm writing this for closure or insight, or just to get it off my chest. This event happened about 5 months ago, but obviously it still bothers me. I've seen a counselor for it quite a few times, but the only solution at this time is anxiety medications until we can actually find a way to work through it. I apologize for my format or spelling, and the way I write. I'm kind of frantic. For the sake of not giving away identifying details, I'm going to refer to where I work as the company. Anyway, here goes. I'm contractually obligated to this company for the next year, and have to continue this work until my time is over here. At this company, we're required to stand 24-hour shifts for security and watch over personnel. Usually these shifts have 2 people, a senior personnel and a new personnel. I'm the senior one, and let my new person have the hours this occurred off because he also had work the same day, so it was just me from the hours between 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. I'm a relatively small female, but usually handle stressful or intimidating situations well, so I never thought of this as a big deal, and never had this problem before. A few months ago I had a bad run-in with a man who was supposed to check in with me throughout the night, before he checked in with my supervisors a few buildings over, as he was on restricted watch. On this night, he was particularly drugged up and seriously drunk, which is against policy. He was half-dressed in uniform and completely spastic. I had never met him before in my life, so I asked his name to check him in, but his speech was so slurred that I couldn't make out anything he was saying. Or maybe he just didn't want me to know his name. Since he was obviously under the influence and was getting aggressive and frustrated with me, asking him to repeat himself, I called my supervisors to let them know his condition. They said they would send someone over right away to come check out the situation. The guy then goes outside of the building to smoke and calm down before my supervisors arrive. Cool beans, right? Wrong. I then call my off-work co-workers that I'm good friends with to ask about this new person and what's been happening with him. I wasn't told anything beside him being restricted. She tells me the reason he's restricted is because he choked his wife and tried to kill her, that he's violent, and that I need to keep watch of him at all times when he's like this. As she's telling me this, I hear him start yelling at other people I'm watching over outside. Okay, great. I grab the biggest guy I can find, another person I'm supposed to be watching over but was low risk, and go outside to try to calm him down. As we go out there, he's talking about killing himself, getting pussy, and being desperately horny. Me, being a small female, I was intimidated and fucking scared of this guy. The way he was graphically detailing how he wanted to kill himself and fuck whoever and whatever. Then he turns to me and starts talking about how he wants to fuck me in the mouth. Nope. I try to keep my composure and tell him that was an unprofessional comment, that he is inebriated at the moment, but to not talk to me like that. I went back inside to call for an estimated time on when my supervisors would be here. As I'm on the phone, this guy comes back in and starts climbing over the desk, pawing at me. He's blowing kisses and winking at me and tapping my arm that I'm holding the phone with. They tell me they must have forgot, but will be on their way soon. I asked them to please hurry up because I'm really fucking uncomfortable. This guy then gets mad at me for telling my supervisors I'm getting uncomfortable and asks me if I want to feel what death feels like. At this point, I literally look this guy in the face and tell him to get the fuck away from me or he's about to feel teeth sliding down his throat. Keep in mind, we're not allowed to have any weapons. Our only defense is to call our supervisors, who are allowed to. I lock myself deep in the back room and call my supervisor's supervisor to tell him everything that's been said, how aggressive he's being, how freaked out I am that things are escalating. My supervisor's supervisor then tells me there's nothing he can do, since he himself is at a club drunk and cannot come to the building to detain this guy. I come out of the room and see that this man is now talking to my supervisor, who had arrived about 15 minutes after I got off the phone with his. As they're talking about how he's not supposed to be doing drugs or drinking, this guy starts throwing the biggest gut-wrenching pity party I've ever fucking seen. It was out of this world. The man hung his head down, held his hat in both of his hands, and told my supervisor how sorry he was for missing curfew. My supervisor then tells him how he's a good guy, and it'll all be okay, and that he has good people like me watching over him all night. If he felt lonely or needed someone to talk to, I'd be there because we're like a big family. Dude, I almost threw up from being so scared. I absolutely disassociated at this point, and this conversation seemed entirely fake and unreal. How could my supervisor be so easily buying this act? What the fuck is going on? This guy threatened my life multiple times, and from the look on his face, he was completely serious. I finally get the supervisor alone and tell him what had been said and done, and that I'm freaked out and don't feel safe. I requested an hourly check-in from our driving security officer. He agreed to let them know to add me to their route, and told me to calm down, that he would be taking the guy to a different building for the night. I calmed myself, believing my supervisor would do this for me, and went out for my smoke break. By the time I came back, my supervisor was gone, but the guy was back at my desk. Awesome. I was worried he would try to fuck with me more, so I tried to avoid even looking in his direction. I called my supervisor to let him know that the guy was now at my desk, and should be going to his building now. Why the supervisor didn't fucking escort the guy from the building, I don't know. The man heard me call my supervisor, and finally left the building after telling me he'd be back to finish talking to me. Happy ending? No. I get a phone call from my supervisor telling me the man never made it to his building, that he's running around on the loose somewhere, and to call the police immediately if I see him. They never sent security to check on me, and told me they found him about a week later. Yes, he was missing for a week. I've since gotten a restraining order, and he's been recently sent to prison. Tonight I'm standing another 24 behind the same desk this all happened, and I still get waves of panic anytime someone comes to check in on me. I still shake, stutter, and have cold sweats. Lose sleep the night before knowing I'm working the 24-hour shift.